let us now look at the Arctic Ocean as a carbon sink. See, as a major carbon sink, the ocean absorbs generally around 90% of the excess of heat in the Earth system, facilitating heat transfer from equator to the poles. So this is the first thing they are doing. Then because of the colder sea surface waters, especially in the polar region, they act like an effective carbon sinks due to their higher capacities for CO2 absorption and dissolution. So they become the actual sink. And the nutrient-rich colder regions exhibit greater carbon absorption capabilities than the warmer areas, so making the polar region the crucial carbon reservoir that stores substantial amount of carbon. So that is how Arctic region actually behaves like a carbon sink for the entire globe. So let us look at what are the sources of the carbon in the Arctic. The first one is permafrost thawing. So the carbon storage is around 1500 billion metric tons of carbon is stored in the permafrost, and there is a potential emission because this thawing may lead to 50 to 100 billion metric tons of CO2 released annually, and methane release is also expected around 10 to 20 million metric tons of methane annually. So these may be the sources of carbon from the permafrost thawing. The second one is wildfires. So there is an increased frequency of wildfires occurring in the Arctic, and from 2000 to 2020 there are around 600% of increase in the wildfires, and these wildfires can release something like 100 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. And due to this wildfire also there is a soil carbon loss, because this results in around 10 to 50% of soil carbon in the affected areas. So these are the second main source of carbon in the Arctic. Third one is agricultural expansion. That means land use changes are happening currently. So expansion of agricultural into uncultivated areas increases the release of stored carbon from these areas. Then nitrogen fertilization also is being used. So the increased use of nitrogen fertilizers leads to a potential emission of up to 2.5 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide. Because how do we know? Because when more and more fertilizers are put into the soil, actually it increases the microbial activity. So that leads to release of more and more carbon dioxide from the soil. And what is the impact on the soil? The cultivation can disrupt the soil structure, leading to carbon loss and degradation. So these are all the major carbon sources in the Arctic. And when we look at the carbon sinks in the Arctic, first one is the Arctic tundra. That means the trees are the main thing. So they can take up around 0.5 to 2 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. They use carbon dioxide for the photosynthesis. And when there is a vegetation shift, this also increases the carbon uptake, because the shrubs are getting expanded, or shrubs are getting converted to small trees. So that means from the lichens and other things, we are actually seeing some small plants getting in the Arctic region. So when there is an increase of plants, they actually consume more carbon dioxide. Then soil organic carbon, when we talk about the tundra soil contains around 200 to 400 billion metric tons of soil organic carbon that can be used by the microorganisms that are present. The second one is the boreal forest. So here again the carbon storage is around 700 billion metric tons of carbon in the biomass and the soil. So here the annual net primary production is like 1 to 2.5 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide is being absorbed by the primary producers. And fire also impacts like wildfires. We had seen the source for carbon is also wildfires, but they also behave like a sink case. The wildfire can return about 300 million metric tons of carbon to the atmosphere annually. So they will actually release that carbon. The third one is the marine ecosystem. So here the phytoplankton absorbs lots of carbon dioxide that is present in the ocean. It's estimated around 0.5 billions of metric tons of CO2 can be consumed by these phytoplanktons. And seagrass and mangrove also contribute to sequestering around 83 million metric tons of carbon. Similarly, the carbonate formation, that means when the CO2 is dissolved in water, leads to bicarbonate and carbonate production, which may lead to sequestration of carbon in the form of carbonate. So what is the effect of the changing climate on the carbon cycle? One is at the Arctic Ocean carbon sink. That is, there is a small net carbon sink currently at 0.1 to 0.2 pegatons, petagrams of carbon per year. So the increased open water could enhance carbon dioxide uptake. That means we have more space for the CO2 to be absorbed. Similarly, freshwater input may alter thermohaline stability and nutrient availability. So all this leads to Arctic Ocean as a carbon sink. And on the other hand, permafrost thaw actually releases carbon also. The permafrost thaw releases carbon initially rapidly, and the rate of carbon release depends on the hydrological status. Currently, we estimate around 130 to 160 petagrams of carbon may be released by 2100. So this is the numbers are quite scary. That means a huge amount of carbon may be released from the permafrost. And what is the reason for that? The thawing of permafrost is due to a global climate change. Then when we talk about the terrestrial Arctic carbon cycle, so longer growing seasons and higher temperature increases the productivity of the plant, and warming of the soil may increase respiration, offsetting the productivity gains by the plants. So change in the soil hydrology actually impact the carbon release rate. That means there is some amount of carbon being absorbed by the plant. Then again, because of the higher microbial activity, more CO2 may be released. So there is some sink and also there is some source. So let us look at the effect of changing climate on the carbon cycle. See the landscape change and the carbon dynamics when we look at. There is an abrupt permafrost thaw can lead to wetland and lake formation. So this is one of the major problem. So there is this affects the balance between aerobic and anaerobic decomposition, and this actually determines how much is being emitted. And similarly, the release of permafrost carbon not evenly distributed. So this is another major problem we are seeing. So this may increase over centuries. So that means it is uneven currently, but it may lead to a consistent problem later on. So when we talk about the subsea permafrost and methane emissions, warming of ocean water may enhance methane emissions because, as we have seen, a low temperature and high pressure keeps the methane hydrate at the bottom of the sea. But when the temperature increases and also the pressure reduces, the methane hydrates may be releasing more methane. So the estimates of methane emission from subsea permafrost are actually varying. And similarly, depending on the depth also, the pressure varies. So that means the release of methane also changes. Balance between aerobic and anaerobic decomposition also affects the methane release. So another source of change of carbon cycle is shipping and pollution. The maritime shipping, which is essential for transporting goods from one place to another place, is critical in the global economy, but this significantly contributes to environmental pollution. That means there is a positive and the negative sides which are there with related to shipping. So it actually accounts for 24% of the global carbon dioxide emissions from fossil fuel combustion, and it emits substantial amount of nitrogen oxides and sulfur oxides, which are key air quality pollutants. We will be studying about persistent organic pollutants in the later part. International maritime transport releases about 940 million tons of carbon dioxide annually, roughly like a 3% of the global greenhouse gas emissions. And similarly, what are the challenges we are supposed to address? One is the maritime shipping significance environment impact requires that we need to develop some robust regulations to reduce the use of shipping or protect the polar ecosystems and reduce or mitigate the climate change effects. So we have to make some regulations. Similarly, the regulations must also be used based on the reliable data and accurate predictive models, especially in the Arctic, where harsh conditions make the data collection effects challenging. So we have to be very careful in understanding what is actually happening. Moreover, the existing carbon cycle models are not having any specific features to accurately represent Arctic's unique conditions, as we have seen albedo and other things which are affected by climate. So the Arctic region is very difficult to understand and study. So due to this, critically evaluating the refining these models is vital for better understanding the Arctic region's ocean carbon cycle. So if we have to do something, we need to understand what is actually happening by developing better models, and based on that we can predict what will happen. But nonetheless, climate change actually leads to lots of change in the global carbon cycle as well as the Arctic region's carbon cycle.